This is what reparation looks like to me for all blacks on the earth, regardless of who held your suffrage papers. This is not just about you. This is about all blacks who came before you and who will come after you. Part 1 of 6. When we speak about reparation, we must make selections that keep on giving. Stocks. Let's talk about stocks. Majority stocks in all the companies or corporations in every country tied to slavery. We must be sure to stipulate that even with a name change, we retain possession of our majority stock holdings, and that no changes of any sort reduces our majority stock holding or ownership. We must understand that slave traders and slave owners were not the only benefactors of slavery. Slaves and land were the main forms of wealth in the United States before 1860. Slaves figured in insurance policies and bank loans. Therefore, universities turned to slave owners and slave traders to raise money. Industry in the North and in Britain made money processing slave-grown tobacco, cotton, and sugar from the South and the Caribbean. Railway companies used slave labor. The most profitable activity on Wall Street was the slave trade. The bedrock of many industries, such as construction, trade, cultivation, child rearing, and the railroad businesses, to name a few, were fueled by the work of slaves. Though blacks from all over the continent were involved in the trade of their own people, there were specific companies that are still operating today that profited from the transportation of slaves. The enslavement of black people in the Americas by the nations and peoples of Western Europe created the economic engine that funded modern capitalism. It is no secret that slavery rests at the foundation of American capitalism and is often synonymous with the sugar, tobacco, and cotton plantations that fuel the Southern economy. Slavery rests at the foundation of many notable companies which acknowledged their involvement in slavery and offered apologies in an attempt to reconcile their tainted history. Question is an apology enough? History has consistently shown that slavery has diminished the quality of life for Black Americans and simultaneously enhanced the quality of life for white Americans. From the institutionalized racism to Black social and economic opportunities, Black Americans are often excluded of Black Americans. Apologies without action cannot compensate an entire group of people for all of the social and economic ills they face as a result of their enslavement. Apologies without action cannot address the residual effects of slavery. Apologies without action cannot provide job opportunities to a group of people who are experiencing high unemployment rates. Apologies without action simply says, "Oh, I am sorry." Apologies without action downplays their role in perpetrating the degradation of Black people. Apologies without action is nothing more than a futile attempt to correct a wrong by pacifying the wronged. Apologies without action does not repair the damage that has been done. Companies that benefited directly from slavery. Founded in 1818, Brooks Brothers is the oldest men's clothier in the US. The clothing brand is known for its exquisite and innovative designs and is frequently worn by head figures, including Barack Obama. The high-end suit retailer got their start selling slave clothes to various slave traders. Brooks Brothers also manufactured and sold clothing specifically made for wear by slaves. Brooks Brothers profited from servant clothing as well as the clothing design for their masters. Brooks Brothers had a livery department which provided garments for coachmen, footmen, chauffeurs, etc. in wealthy households, including those south of the Mason-Dixon line. As symbols of their prosperity, moneyed slaveholders often outfitted their enslaved domestics in fine clothing as a display of their wealth. For example, Thomas Jefferson meticulously recorded the clothing distributed to each member of the enslaved community at Monticello, noting the quality and quantity of materials besides the name of each slave, as documented by vestige. What is known as Bank America was formulated out of Boatman Savings Institution and Southern Bank of St. Louis and the Bank of Metropolis. In 2005, the Heritage Research Center found 2 instances in which slaves were used as collateral in exchange for settling personal debts. The chief executive of Bank of America, Ken Lewis, commented, "The institution of slavery left an indelible and shameful mark on our nation's history, and we regret any actions our predecessors may have taken that supported or tolerated the institution of slavery in America." As reported by Sacramento Business Journal, Bank of America is currently the second largest financial establishment in the United States. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Become a frequent visitor of Hobby Money. Previously called the Nautilus Mutual Life Insurance Company, NYLI, was founded in 1845 and is currently the 3rd largest life insurance company in the United States. NYLI holds $570 billion in assets and is ranked number 69 on the 2018 Fortune 500 list. So you just think of how many of them is on the stock market. Now back to business. Initially, the company sold fire and marine insurance, but then ventured into the slave business because of the demand. Life insurance was a necessity for slave owners so they could reap further benefits from enslaving blacks, as evidenced in the case of Zong Massacre, in which 133 slaves were thrown overboard in an attempt to collect on the insurance policies taken out on their lives. NYLI is a subsidiary of American International Group, Inc., another company which profited from slavery, as reported by the New York Times. The Bank of England was established in 1694 and was the United Kingdom's central bank. It is also the world's 8th oldest bank. When the bank was established, it was one of the pioneers in commercial credit, which was used to finance slavery. Wealthy politicians and city residents with hefty titles, such as governor, contributed to the slave trade by providing funding to the sustainability of slave routes, slave colonies, as well as the military and naval entities that protected slave routes and plantations, as explained by BBC. In 1927, the Bank of England merged with Lloyd's Bank, another company that assisted in financing the slave trade. After 1660, the fruition of British companies was credited to Britain's financial organizations. Even though there were no banks, overseas trade was fueled by credit and bills of credit, which were instrumental in the growth of the slave trade. Merchants in Bristol, London, and Liverpool became the bankers of the slave trade. In the 18th century, provincial banking emerged. Liverpool merchants developed Haywood's Bank, which later became a portion of Barclays Bank, as documented by BBC. Barclays has international branches and currently operates in the United States and Africa. Lehman Brothers, whose business empire started in the slave trade, recently admitted their part in the business of slavery. According to the Sun Times, the now defunct financial services firm acknowledged that its founding partners owned not one, but several enslaved blacks during the Civil War era, and that, in all likelihood, it profited significantly from slavery. This is a sad part of our heritage. We are deeply apologetic. It was a terrible thing. There's no one sitting in the United States in the year 2005, hopefully, who would ever in a million years defend the practice, said Joe Polizotto, General Counsel of Lehman Brothers. Aetna Insurance, Aetna Inc., the United States' largest health insurer, apologized for selling policies in the 1850s that reimbursed slave owners for financial loss when the enslaved blacks they owned died. We know they didn't just die, they killed them to collect on the money. Aetna has long acknowledged that for several years shortly after its founding in 1853, that the company may have insured the lives of slaves, said Aetna spokesman Fred LaBerge in 2002. We express our deep regret over any participation at all in this deplorable practice. Yeah, really. JP Morgan Chase admitted their company's links to slavery. Today, we are reporting that this research found that between 1831 and 1865, two of our predecessor banks, Citizen Bank and Canal Bank in Louisiana, accepted approximately 13,000 enslaved individuals as collateral on loans and took ownership of approximately 1,250 of them when the plantation owners defaulted on the loans. The company wrote in a statement, New York Life Insurance Company is the largest mutual life insurance company in the United States. They also took part in slavery by selling insurance policies on enslaved blacks. Despite the fact that New York Life Insurance first president James de Piester Ogden described slavery as evil, this doesn't negate the fact that the company sold insurance policies to slave owners in the interest of their slaves' lives. By 1847, a third of the policies held then was for slaves. According to the USA Today, evidence of 10 more New York Life slave policies comes from an 1847 account book kept by the company's Natchez, Mississippi agent, W.A. Britton. The book, part of the collection at Louisiana State University, contains Britton's notes on slave policies he wrote for amounts ranging from $375 to $600. In 1906, History of New York Life says 339 of the company's first 1,000 policies were written on the lives of slaves. USA Today reported that Wachovia Corporation, now owned by Wells Fargo, has apologized for its ties to slavery after disclosing that two of its historical predecessors owned enslaved blacks and accepted them as payment. On behalf of Wachovia Corporation, I apologize to all Americans and especially to Black Americans and people of African descent, said Ken Thompson, Wachovia Chairman and Chief Executive Officer. In the statement, we are deeply saddened by these findings. Georgia Railroad and Banking Company and the Bank of Charleston owned and accepted slaves as collateral. They later became part of Wells Fargo by way of Wachovia. In the 2000s, Wells Fargo targeted Black for predatory lending. So this is just to let you know that nothing ain't friggin' change. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Become a frequent visitor of Hobby Money. Rothschild Group, N.M. Rothschild and Sons Bank in London, was linked to slavery. The company that was one of the biggest names in the city of London had previously disclosed links to slavery in the British colonies. Documents seen by the Financial Times have revealed that Nathan Mayer Rothschild and the banking family's 19th century patriarch made personal gains by using enslaved blacks as collateral in dealings with a slave owner. Norfolk Southern also has a history in the slave trade. The Mobile and Girard Company, which is now part of Norfolk Southern, offered slaveholders $180, $3,379 in today's money, and that was in 2016. So you know we in 2019, it's going to be more, okay? So everything I tell you here, you need to see it on a grander scale, and we're going to get to that. The Mobile and Girard Company, which is now a part of Norfolk Southern, offered slaveholders $180, $3,379 in today's money, a piece for enslaved blacks they would rent to the railroad for 1 year, according to the records. The Central of Georgia, another company aligned with Norfolk Southern's line, today valued its slaves at $31,303, $663,033 in 2016 money on record. E.W. Scripps Gannett, parent company of USA Today, found that their own parent company, E.W. Scripps and Gannett, has had links to the slave trade. According to reports, Fleet Boston evolved from an earlier financial institution, Providence Bank, founded by a John Brown, who was a slave trader and owned slaves and owned ships used to transport enslaved blacks. The bank financed Brown's slave voyages and profited from them. Brown even reportedly helped charter what became Brown University. CSX Corp used slave labor to construct portions of some U.S. rail lines under the political and legal system that was in place more than a century ago. Two enslaved blacks, whom the company were identified as John Henry and Reuben. The record states they were to be returned clothed when they arrived to work for the company. Individual enslaved blacks cost up to $200, the equivalent of $3,800 in 2016 money. The rent for a season, and CSX took full advantage. And any place you see me put black, I put it because these reports were trying to show that all the slaves came from Africa. And we all know that's not true. So I just said blacks. Canadian National Railway Company is a Canadian Class 1 railway headquartered in Montreal, Quebec, that serves Canada and the mid-eastern and southern United States. The company also has a history in which it benefited from slavery. The Mobile and Ohio, now part of Canadian National, valued their slaves lost to the war and emancipation of $199,691 on record. The amount is currently worth $2.2 million in 2016 money. Brown Brothers Harriman is the oldest and one of the largest private banks in the United States, created in 1818. Brown Brothers Harriman now has a revenue of $1.3 billion and has a $5.6 trillion of assets in its custody. USA Today found that the New York Merchant Bank of James and William Brown, currently known as Brown Brothers Harriman, owned hundreds of enslaved blacks and assisted the cotton business by lending millions of dollars to Southern partners, merchants or traders, and cotton brokers, as explained by the Atlanta Black Star. To add insult to injury, the company has also assisted Fritz Thyssen in financing Adolf Hitler. Okay. Brown University, named for the Brown brothers, who gave money to the university. Two were slave traders. Another ran a factory that used slave-grown cotton. University Hall was built in part by slave labor. Fleet Boston grew out of Providence Bank, founded by one of the Brown's brothers, a slave trader who owned slave ships. The bank made money from the slave trade. Providence, Rhode Island, was the home port of many slave ships. USA Today reported that New York-based AIG completed the purchase of American General Financial Group, a Houston-based insurer that owns U.S. Life Insurance Company. A United States life policy on an enslaved black living in the Kentucky was reprinted in a 1935 article about slave insurance in the American Conservationist magazine. AIG says it has found documentation indicating U.S. life insurer enslaved blacks. Barclays, the British multinational banking and financial services company headquartered in London, has now conceded that companies it bought over the years, may have been involved in the slave trade. You think? Tiffany and Company. I know this must be a surprise for a lot because when you think of Tiffany and Company, you're thinking about something with jewelry. Tiffany and Company was originally financed with profits from a Connecticut cotton mill. The mill operated from cotton picked by slaves. There you have it. Princeton raised money and recruited students from rich slave-owning families in the South and the Caribbean. Princeton was not alone in hitting up slave owners and traders for money and students. So did Harvard, Yale, Penn, Columbia, Rutgers, Brown, Dartmouth, and the University of Delaware. By the middle of 1700s, most Princeton students were the sons of slave owners. Many of Columbia's students were sons of slave traders. Harvard Law School, endowed with money from Isaac Royal, an Antiguan slave owner and sugar grower. Yale University money from slave trading went to its first endowed scholarships, professorship, and library. Universities not only sought and accepted money from slave owners and traders, they helped to create scientific racism. They used science to justify the inequalities between black and white. Don't go away from the chat. We need to discuss this. It is apparent that marijuana reform is taking place worldwide. In 2018, 21 states considered bills that would legalize adult use marijuana. Connecticut, Delaware, Georgia, Hawaii, Kansas, Kentucky, Maryland, Minnesota, Mississippi, Missouri, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Carolina, Wisconsin, and West Virginia. The marijuana arrest and prosecution rate are disproportionately black, even though the American Civil Liberties Union states that there is similarity in the marijuana consumption rate between blacks and whites. It is this way in areas highly populated or not so highly populated by blacks. The prison companies have been lobbying for more lengthy and severe sentencing to ensure filled prison cells. In fact, the prison stocks increased with Trump's election. In the private prison system, federal prisoners increased 120%, while state prisoners increased 33%. These prison systems rely on a healthy government budget. The number of people arrested for a marijuana law violation in 2017 was 659,700. The percentage of people arrested for drug law violations who are black or Latino, 46.9%, despite making up just 31.5% of the US population. If you don't have a hobby, find a craft that you like. There are a host of crafts available to you. Find out who needs what you produce with your craft. There's always a need. Sometimes people don't know what they need until you bring it to them. Become an expert in your craft by learning everything about it. The more you know about your craft, the better you can exploit it.